Perfect. Oh, here is Renee. Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome in. Take a seat. Welcome to a new episode of Co-opting AI. I'm thrilled you are here with us. I am Mona Sloane. I'm a sociologist of artificial intelligence. I am the founder and host of the Co-opting AI public speaker series, which we've been running since 2019. So for a while now, this is our 43rd event. And I am super thrilled to host a conversation on co-opting AI crime today. I'm an assistant professor of data science and media studies at the University of Virginia, where I run Sloane Lab, and I'm also a long-term fellow of the NYU Institute for Public Knowledge, which is a wonderful cue to thank the co-opting AI supporters, chiefly the Karsh Institute of Democracy at UVA, and of course the NYU Institute for Public Knowledge. Thank you to all faculty and staff for helping make our series such a success. Now, before we begin today, I want to underline that here at UVA, we acknowledge that the land where we learn and work is the homeland and traditional territory of the Monacan Indian Nation. We pay respect to the elders and knowledge keepers, past and present, and we also acknowledge and pay respect to the enslaved Africans, enslaved laborers, and free Black laborers who built the University of Virginia, as well as their descendants. Today, we acknowledge the land, we acknowledge labor, traditions, and knowledge, and we acknowledge lives. Now, today's Co-opting AI episode is focused on an area in which AI has actually long played a role. In other words, AI is not new to the topic of crime and the social framings of crime. Actually, the idea that we can use technology to predict criminality has always had a firm grip on our imagination. And that is not just since Philip K. Dick published Minority Report in the 1950s. In fact, this imagination is integral to the conception of statistics. Some of you may know that Francis Galton, who is considered a godfather of statistics, was a die-hard eugenicist who believed that criminality was hereditary. And amongst other things, he used this argument to promote statistics as a scientific discipline and as a way to, quote unquote, better society. Colleague Amanda Lewandowski, in her 2021 public books essay, Face Surveillance Was Always Flawed, argues that facial recognition technology actually was born at the same time the mugshot was born. And with it, the idea that criminality can be detected in people's faces. To this day, technologists, or at least some technologists, are attracted to this idea, as a quick scan of some recent proceedings of computer science conferences will show. Now, today, predicting crime is not just a matter of analyzing faces, but of using all kinds of data to infer when and where crime is most likely to occur. Often these systems are hailed as enabling a more prudent use of public resources, but we have mounting evidence that these technologies can also be incredibly ineffective and extremely biased. Our conversation today will shed light on this very thorny issue. We will discuss how AI-driven predictive technologies intersect with law enforcement and the social framing of crime more generally. And I am truly grateful and thrilled in equal measure to welcome three experts on this topic. Please join me in welcoming Renee Cummings, Max Isaacs, and Dillon Reisman. Now, today we will begin with Max. Max Isaacs is a senior staff attorney with the Policing Project at NYU. His work focuses on new and emerging policing technologies and their implications for civil rights, civil liberties, and racial justice. Prior to joining the Policing Project, Max clerked for Judge Diana Gribbin-Motz of the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals and Judge Lorna Schofield of the Southern District of New York. He also served as a civil rights fellow at Lambda Legal Defense and Education Fund. He graduated magna cum laude from NYU Law, where he was a member of the Law Review. He also holds a Bachelor of Music degree from the Conservatory of Music at Purchase College. Welcome, Max. Thank you for being here. Following Max will be Dillon Reisman. Dillon is a staff attorney at the American Civil Liberties Union of New Jersey, where he spearheads litigation and advocacy at the intersection of civil rights, artificial intelligence, and other new technologies. His docket includes work on due process and public benefits, facial recognition, and surveillance in data privacy. He first joined ACLU New Jersey in 2021 as a Skadden Fellow to address how the use of AI and automated decision systems by state government affects the rights of New Jersey residents, and to examine how algorithms perpetuate systemic inequalities. Dillon received his bachelor's degree in computer science from Princeton University and his law degree from NYU as well. While at law school, he worked in the Racial Justice Clinic, where he represented incarcerated women fighting for their right to practice their religion, and the Technology Law and Policy Clinic, where he represented advocacy organizations fighting against the use of flawed and biased technology in the criminal legal system. He also interned for Chief Judge Colleen McMahon of the Southern District of New York and the ACLU New Jersey. He was a notes editor on the NYU Law Review and co-founder of Rights Over Tech, a student group working for civil and human rights in the face of harmful forms of technology. Before law school, Dillon was a software engineer on Google's privacy team and later a research engineer at the Princeton Center for Information Technology Policy and the AI Now Institute. As a technologist, Dillon published research in data privacy, AI, and police advocacy. So very interdisciplinary group today. Welcome, Dillon. Thank you for being here. Following Max and Dillon and closing us off will be my valued UVA colleague, Renee Cummings, who is a 2023 VentureBeat AI Innovator Award winner. She is an AI, data, and tech ethicist and the first data activist in residence here at UVA in the School of Data Science, where she was named Professor of Practice in Data Science. She also serves as co-director of the Public Interest Technology University Network here at UVA and is a non-resident fellow at the Brookings Institution and the inaugural senior fellow, AI, Data, and Public Policy at All Tech is Human, a leading and important think tank. She's a distinguished member of the World Economic Forum's Data Equity Council and the World Economic Forum's AI Governance Alliance, an advisory council member for the AI and Equality Initiative at Carnegie Council for Ethics in International Affairs, and a member of the Global Academic Network at the Center for AI and Digital Policy. Renee is also a criminologist, criminal psychologist, therapeutic jurisprudence specialist, and a community scholar at Columbia University. Welcome, Renee. Thank you so much for being here. Now, a few housekeeping items which you may already be familiar with. We will be hearing from all of our guests today. And first and foremost, I will be stepping back while they are speaking and questions pop into your head. Please pop these questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screens. We will bring in your questions in the Q&A part of this event. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Max, and thank you all for being here.
Thanks so much, Mona. As Mona mentioned, I'm a senior staff attorney at the Policing Project. I'll just say a word about sort of our philosophy at the Policing Project. So what we work towards is what we call front-end accountability in policing. And sort of the way that you can think about that is by starting with what we call back-end accountability. So back-end accountability is what we generally think of when we think about holding police accountable. Some new technology has been put out there in the world and has caused harm of some kind. The response generally is, there might be a lawsuit or an investigation, someone might get fired, and those forms of accountability are really important, but they need to work in tandem with what we call front-end accountability, which means before police act, they need to have affirmative legislative authorization for their actions. It's illegitimate if they don't. And there need to be clear rules of the road for how police use technology. And the reason why we're dedicated to this issue, when you think about government generally, you think of regulation, just reams of regulation. The US Code has all these different volumes. And then when it comes to policing, the police are critically underregulated. And to the extent they are regulated, often the regulation is deficient. And so we think that there needs to be much more of this front-end accountability in policing. So the topic today is predictive technologies, which is where I'll focus, but I think my comments kind of speak to policing technology and AI and law enforcement more broadly. So there's a lot of attention being paid to predictive policing, and in the spirit of co-opting AI, I want to use that to unpack a few assumptions that we have about policing in general. So I think one of the things that's being assumed by predictive policing is that when you have crime, what we want to do is send the police. And sure, that sometimes is appropriate. If I finish this session and I come back and my house has been broken into, I'm probably going to want to call the police. The problem is that there are a lot of times where it's not really the police that we want to send in the first place. Law enforcement's called to deal with a lot of social problems rooted in things like homelessness and substance abuse, and they're just not really well equipped often to deal with those issues. Sometimes it's a training problem. There's just not enough training on things like mediation and de-escalation. Sometimes it's just the fact that they carry weapons. So you always have that kind of in the background, the possibility of escalation. Sometimes it's just a matter of, in a lot of communities, there's a fraught relationship between people and the police. So there are a lot of reasons why, sometimes you just don't want police to respond. If you take a more holistic approach to public safety, then you can see some better alternatives. And so a colleague of mine, Alex Heaton, was talking about an idea he had. He's trying to work with a researcher to use AI tools, not to predict crime, but to predict when people need help and how we can get them to the right sources of help. So, this person might be falling behind on their rent and they're at risk of eviction. Or that person, maybe we could help them, get their medication because they're running low this month, and that's been a problem in the past. And one of the things that I fear and want to raise is that the focus that we have on policing technology is a way of sort of entrenching this way of thinking of police as the solution to the problem of crime. And they're a part of the solution, to be sure, but I think they're certainly not the only solution. So I would implore people to think sort of more broadly about how we can use AI in public safety. Then the second assumption is that if police can predict crime, they're going to know what to do about it. And sometimes that's true, and sometimes it's really, really not true. Sometimes they screw up and pretty badly. And I'm not trying to say that all instances are like this, but there was the example of the man in Chicago who was put on a heat list, and the police started contacting him so often that the people in the neighborhood who were gang members thought he was a snitch, and they shot him. There was a woman who was targeted by one of these predictive policing systems was harassed so often that she started having panic attacks. I think the police contacted her like 20 times in some short period of time. The colleague that I mentioned earlier has actually been to some in person, has been to some of these interventions where they've used these predictive risk-based systems in order to identify people who might get in trouble. And he said, yeah, the systems did a great job of identifying who was getting in trouble, and then it didn't solve the problem. They still got entangled in the legal system. They still were victims of violence. And I just want to be clear, these are anecdotes. I'm not, they're not a substitute for evidence. I'm not making a claim about the efficacy of these things. What I'm saying is I think they ought to make us question the assumption that these policing tech vendors and the folks creating these systems really have the solution to this problem that we have of crime. So what would I do? At the policing project, we're not really pro or anti-technology in the abstract. We tend to think of it in terms of benefit and cost. And so, right off the bat, that first part, benefit, is just super important. There needs to be independent, rigorous testing of all of these systems that can impact civil rights and civil liberties. And that's sort of step one. If they can't prove benefit, then that's really where the conversation should stop. I'll just say it's astonishing to me. I mean, I've been, I've worked on a number of different technologies, from license plate recognition. My colleague Katie Kinsey does a lot of work on biometrics. It's astonishing how poorly established the efficacy of some of these tools are in terms of reducing crime. The other thing I would say is that any policing technology, predictive tools, any tool that has the potential to impact rights, you have to have some regulatory framework, and a meaningful one, in place before it's put out into the world. The way things are now, often it's just police chiefs deciding we're gonna adopt this tool. Here's how we're gonna do it, and it's really not up to them. And I think that's part of what our organization tries to say. It's not their decision. It's the decision of folks like us in the community. We speak through our elected representatives. That is sort of the notion of front-end accountability that we need to take control of and have an active role in policymaking around these issues. So those are my thoughts, and I'll pass it over to Dillon.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Max. And thanks, Mona, for letting me be here today to talk to you all. I have a presentation, so I will share it, assuming I don't share an embarrassingly wrong window, which, there we go. That doesn't look embarrassingly wrong to me, except that I have to actually present the thing. Here we go. Okay. Can everyone see that? Yes. All right, there we go. Hi, everyone. So title this presentation. I will have a lot of the same, I think, lessons that Max has to offer, but I think I come at it a little differently. You're going to hear a lot about New Jersey. Sorry that probably a lot of you might be from Virginia or other places, but I promise that I hope the lessons are universal in nature. The title of this presentation is Crime Doesn't Pay Unless You Are a Vendor of Anti-Crime Technology, in which case it probably pays pretty well. So first, though, a little bit about me. Just quickly, Mona gave a really nice intro, but I'm a staff attorney at the ACLU of New Jersey. That's the local affiliate of the national organization. We're independent, though. We come up with our own priorities. We have our own projects. And this presentation is my views, not those of my employer. Before I was a staff attorney, though, and before I was a lawyer, I was a computer scientist and research engineer and software engineer at the AI Now Institute and Princeton CITP. It let me meet a lot of interdisciplinary people and just really expanded my views on a lot of things. I also love ice cream. So what do I do? My day-to-day is hard to describe because it kind of involves a little bit of everything. I engage in litigation, policy advocacy, and public education at the intersection of tech and civil rights. That involves multiple areas, but the criminal legal system and policing is a major project area for me, and is where I did a lot of my work before I was at ACLU and before law school. So I guess before I dive into some examples of things I work on, I would like just to say, like, why do I do this? And I think it's because, given the position I've found myself in, it's clear to me that, and we can talk more about this offline or later, but it is clear to me that, our technology really constitutes this infrastructure of systemic oppression. We talk about systemic inequities, systemic inequalities, racism, sexism, colorism, all sorts of issues. And all of those things really are instantiated by our technology. They existed before technology, they'll exist after. They existed before digital technology. Not all technology, of course, is digital, but I'll just say that, like, it's a nexus at which to study these problems. And but the thing I struggle with, and the thing that I'd love to talk to you about, or if you're someone who's engaged in this, it's hard to communicate all of the really wonderful social science on this and on how infrastructure functions. It's hard to communicate that to policymakers, which I will get into later. But anyway, first I'd like to talk about some of the technologies I encounter in my day-to-day job. They're not all predictive in nature, but they all involve data, and obviously data being the fuel of prediction. I think it's all very relevant, and the lessons, again, I think are widely applicable. So, for example, in our job, what do I have to encounter? We deal with advocating around face recognition technology. We have, even in the past 2 years alone, we've had at least 2 cases of that we've worked on concerning the use of face recognition, and in one case, a definite wrong identification. A Black man named Nigeria Parks from Paterson, New Jersey. This has been widely reported. You can look, there's New York Times stories, the litigation's ongoing. He was completely wrongfully accused of a shoplifting incident that he was nowhere near, all thanks to face recognition. But there's also other cases, the case of Francisco Arteaga. He was a defendant who was identified through face recognition, and he fell into the scarier gap of there wasn't really, that it wasn't clearly him, it wasn't clearly not him, and the only evidence was the face recognition match, and then eyewitnesses looking at the picture that had been found through face recognition and basically ratifying it post hoc. Excellent example of the ways that face recognition can be suggestive, and at the very least that a defendant needs the right to contest the system to test those things. That's the example of the sort of back-end accountability that Max was talking about. But we also encounter many other systems, automated license plate readers, one of your more classic surveillance type systems. AI has accelerated the use of them because that they're able to aggregate a lot of, because license plate readers have become more effective. And the systems that are used to collect data from automated license plate readers have become national in scope. This picture on the right here, that's a license plate reader that you might find on a light pole. This one's in Elizabeth, New Jersey. But there's a lot of funding of them and a lot of doubling down on their use, because even just, you may see this in the news wherever you are, there's a lot of hand-wringing about the rise in auto thefts. And technology is the solution, obviously, to the rise in auto thefts. So we're going to install automated license plate readers everywhere. And you can see an example here of where license plate readers, when you're a law enforcement agency and you have a license plate reader, it comes with, it's not just the readers, it's the data storage platform. And it actually makes it incredibly easy for you to share your detection data with agencies all across the country. So the Millburn Police Department, Millburn is a suburb outside of a New York City area suburb in New Jersey, and they share their data with law enforcement agencies, both federal and state and local, all across the country. And these systems come baked with, we talk about predictive policing as one of the classic examples of a predictive technology, but as the tools of prediction become even easier for developers to use, systems like this promise things like crime trend analysis and crime scene analysis to track the use of, to detect patterns in data of where cars are appearing. It's been used in prosecutions to identify, for example, suspected drug smugglers, drug runners. Why is someone driving from, Massachusetts to New York City the same route every week? Maybe they're a drug dealer, things like that. So it was already mentioned, predictive policing. I'm sure a lot of people here have heard of things like predpol, no longer called predpol, Geolytica. We have that in New Jersey too. There was a big Wired story and by Wired and the markup on how these tools don't really work, which is actually an interesting thing that I would love to know if my co-panelists detect, which is that I think classic predictive policing, people are wising up to the fact that it doesn't really work. And I think by people, I mean the people who matter, which are police departments, have wised up to the fact that it doesn't really work and that they have other tools that they'd rather spend their money on. But that's not an official data-driven opinion. That's just a sense I have. We also, talk about gunshot detection. Paterson and Newark are two of our biggest cities in New Jersey. This is a map of the deployment of them. Gunshot detection sends up a signal of where gunshots are detected and sends police to them. Of course, this generates massive false positives. Whenever a car backfires or whenever a car door slams, police come in expecting to find gunshots. And obviously, these are always going to be deployed predominantly in Black and brown communities, more so than other communities. And then finally, last example is this weird one from Cape May, that sort of thing that we would encounter. It was reported that the police in Cape May partnered with a generative AI company to help crack a 1991 Cape May County cold case. I was able to get some of the public records about it. They're not super revealing, except for the fact that basically it is what it sounds like. They took generative AI and they took the entire police report and all of the witness or suspect interviews, all of the files, a map of the street where this child lived in 1991, and they wanted to use it to see, I guess, gain more insights from the law. And that's the sort of scary thing that generative AI enables, is that you no longer need to actually apply statistics. You can just simply pretend to ask a chatbot for its opinion on what's happened. I don't take this very seriously. I mean, this is just pure marketing and pure, they got a news headline out of it. I don't think they were actually expecting that this would work, but hold that thought, it'll come later. Oh no, what's this? I screwed up my this is a totally different presentation now. Fun New Jersey facts. I guess I'll share some of those fun New Jersey facts with you all. Did you know that New Jersey has 564 municipalities? It's not like the most necessarily per capita, but it's definitely the most by population density. If you see the top right corner of New Jersey, Bergen County at the turn of the 19th century only had 30 counties, only 30 towns. Today it has 70 towns because on racial and suburban rural lines, they all divided up. You can read all about it. It means we have 564 municipalities, 550 law enforcement agencies, and 593 operating school districts in a relatively small and densely populated area. We have too many damn towns. Also, another fun New Jersey fact, New Jersey's Open Public Records Act is totally under attack. We have a movement in the state to totally gut it. And that is super relevant for us today, actually, because it includes things like there is proposed language that is still being considered to exempt from all public government records administrative or technical information regarding ... software applications and networks that or related technologies. The language in the brackets is what used to be in the law and is what would be taken out of the law. It basically would say you don't get any public records about any technical systems. So this is really concerning. What does this have to do with what we're talking about today? Let's see if the slide changes. What does this mean? It means that when we're talking about all of those systems before, we're talking about vendors, and that's what I'm thinking of. When I came into my job, I didn't expect I'd have to be a corporate investigator, but that's really what I've become. Because you have all of these legal system, criminal policing and criminal legal system AI vendors selling a narrative for their products. Government purchasers, policymakers, and decision makers across all of those hundreds of agencies we have in the state buy into that narrative. And when we're talking about crime, we're talking about something that's so local. We're talking about your local police department. We're talking about local politics. We're talking about the scary New York Post story. They buy into that narrative, and the public has no means to rebut that narrative through evidence that would actually be legible to policymakers. Because all of it is, there's just no transparency. There's no knowledge of it. In the context of AI and actually why we're here and the data, to link it up to like all, I think, really what people in the sort of the, I think, the sociology and the social sciences space think about. When we think about AI, what we're talking about is how data constructs that reality, how our classifications and infrastructure determine that reality. So not only is it that all of these things are decentralized and we don't have the data to rebut it, but as they adopt these tools, they are also imagining the reality that they are selling. They're they're determining their own success metric. They're determining their own future. So here's like a case study of this. This is somewhat related. It actually kind of flips the narrative around. I'm almost done also. I've lost track of time. But to flip the narrative a little bit, in Paterson, New Jersey, a company called Trulio, which actually is, I think, spread pretty widely in the past couple of years, they promised to do police body-worn camera analysis in the hopes of using it for police accountability. They say we do not process, we go to lengths to redact people's face, like the civilians' faces. This is about taking what the police officers are saying and trying to classify it to make sure that they're following department guidelines. For example, you see this example here. Sir, I hear you, take a deep breath. Like that's good information for that officer's sergeant to look at. And say, oh, okay, like this person's doing the right thing. Or is this person being overly coarse with people? Or is this person being overly coarse or overly unprofessional? Or are they resorting to like violent language quickly? This is the sort of thing that gets sold to police departments as a police accountability tool. It's constructing the reality of what police accountability is. The reality it's constructing is that being a good officer is like using nice words. And which could be important, but isn't the whole story. And then they get to tout all of these metrics and say how great a job they've been doing. And this is not just happening. This is how it's happening for officers. Am I echoing? No, that's good. This is how it's happening for officers. It's happening whenever an AI system is being deployed. They're constructing the reality that they're then selling. This is really, and this is kind of, I think, the kicker on this story and the end of my presentation. But the reason this came up in Paterson, if you're not familiar with Paterson, New Jersey, it's right outside New York City in Passaic County, New Jersey. It is a town that is majority Black and brown, and they had a horrible police department that committed so many abuses for so many years. Finally, very sadly, though, in 2023, police officers shot a community activist that was having a mental health crisis who had called the police for help and ended up getting shot. And that finally spurred our Attorney General to take over the Paterson Police Department. It was taken over by the state. The system, Trulio, is one of the things they brought in as a part of a next-gen policing initiative. But that's not accountability. They're constructing the reality they want of accountability. If you ask people in the community activists what they want civilian complaint review boards. They want open access to police internal affairs files. They don't want tech, and they don't want to predict which officers are using the nicest language. And yet, there's this one-way ratchet where we're always resorting to technology for every solution. And at the same time, it's constructing the reality that is evaluating itself. So that's unfortunate. My last grandest wish, if every policymaker could read and engage with Susan Lee Starr and Jeffrey Bowker sorting things out, I'm like a very poorly read I was a wannabe sociologist at one point. I still think it's important because it really, actually thinking about how this technology shapes how our infrastructures shape the world that we're engaging with is really important, and I think is something that's always going to be missing from the policy debate. I don't know if our policymakers are capable of thinking in those terms. but it would be really nice if they were. And with that, that's the end of my presentation. Feel free to reach out to me, but thank you all for listening. I'm excited to talk, and I'll hand it off to Renee.
Thank you so very much for that. Let me apologize. I've been struggling to get into this conversation because the internet server that I'm using just is also struggling with the bandwidth. So I am Renee Cummings. I don't know what was discussed beyond the last 10 minutes. So I will give my little 2 cents when it comes to AI and crime. So I've been a criminologist and criminal psychologist and therapeutic jurisprudence specialist for the last 15 years. I also have a background in terrorism studies. So when I think about crime and criminality, I think I come from the psychological, the forensic, as well as situational and environmental crime prevention. So for the last 20 years or more, we have been using predictive analytics in policing, from the problem-solving policing model that focused on the SARA model, which was scanning, analysis, response, and assessment. And that morphed into data-driven policing, predictive policing, evidence-based policing, intelligence-led policing, and now we're at precision policing. So predictive analytics, data, and policing have had a very, very long history. And while I've spent a considerable amount of my time looking at what happens in the realm of crime and criminality at the intersection of artificial intelligence and criminal justice, focusing on data justice, racial justice, design justice, even environmental justice issues, we know there are systemic challenges. We know that many of our police departments are still doing race-driven policing. We know that many times this approach to policing, predictive analytics, really puts the same cops on the same dots in the same communities over and over. What algorithms have done in policing is really overpromised and under-delivered. Now we're talking about algorithmic policing. We appreciate, of course, that surveillance technology, facial recognition technology, not only do they really infringe on our democratic rights and our civil rights and our human rights, and not only are they constructing a really new paradigm when it comes to digital rights and algorithmic justice as well, what they've made us realize now is that the algorithm is being used from everything to an undercover agent or a plainclothes policeman. We now have the algorithms doing all of those work. At UVA in particular, when I became the first data activist in residence, my project, which is just about finished, really looks at the ways in which we can bring a digital force score to the amount of surveillance technologies that are being deployed in communities as a way to inspire a different kind of relationship between communities and law enforcement, a way in which we can bring greater transparency and accountability to policing, and a way in which we can also bring a trauma-informed approach to technology that's being deployed. So two of the things that I always speak about is a justice-oriented and a trauma-informed approach to the ways in which we are doing AI. We appreciate also that many of these technologies deployed in our underserved, high-need, vulnerable communities really continue a really sad history when it comes to tracking and tracing and terrorizing and traumatizing those communities. So we know that algorithmic policing can create many, many challenges in many of our high needs, underserved, impacted communities. And we've got to bring a requisite level of due diligence and a really sophisticated approach when it comes to big data ethics and when it comes to AI ethics, when we're thinking about just deploying technologies in many of our underserved communities. I think at the moment, the big news, even in New York, is now the deployment of AI in our subways to reduce gun violence, which seems to be now the focus of the city when it comes to crime and criminality. So really understanding predictive analytics, how it intersects with data justice and racial justice and algorithmic justice. Very, very important conversation. And my two former panelists, I think you all did an excellent job bringing that to the fore. Other cases that I would like to highlight would be Portia Woodruff. I don't know if someone looked at Portia's case, 8 months pregnant Black woman, Detroit, arrested for carjacking, told the police she was not there. Of course, their facial recognition technology telling them that she was there. The computer said you were there. And of course, how that impacted not only Portia's physical and mental health when she was arrested at 8 months pregnant, and of course went into early contractions, but the extraordinary amount of trauma that she has had to experience. I guess also the other case would be, and it probably was mentioned, Robert Williams, also in Detroit, arrested for, again, with facial recognition technology for shoplifting, was not Robert Williams. Of course, the police took about 15 to 20 hours to realize that that was not Robert Williams. But one of the things that I like to focus on is what I call data trauma and the ways in which policing and algorithmic policing continue to transmit intergenerational trauma through our communities. So that's the racial justice and of course the data justice and the social justice approach to the ways in which we are trying to deploy algorithms in the criminal justice setting. On the other side of that, I just want to touch on some of the good things that we're seeing with AI when it comes to policing. The area that continues to fascinate me, because I have a history as a criminal profiler, is the ways in which we are now using AI and generative AI to reconstruct crime scenes. Some very brilliant work being done at the intersection of crime scene reconstruction and DNA analysis. Another positive use case when it comes to AI and Gen AI would be statement analysis and the ways in which generative AI is now able to analyze suspect statements and also analyze victim statements. So in the realm of victimology, Gen AI and AI are really enhancing the processes when we think about interpersonal violence and domestic violence. And now we are able to bring a higher level or a greater due diligence from the police officer's perspective when it comes to reading the statement of a victim, running that through a generative AI model and really pulling out those key words that speaks to the fact that this individual is high risk in a situation of intimate partner violence or domestic violence. So those are some great cases there. The other area in which I specialize, which would be terrorism studies, and have been doing a substantial amount of work in financial crime. So two cases, one in New York City, a chatbot deployed by the city that has been telling small business owners pretty much how to break the law, which has been in the news lately. And most recently, a deep fake that participated in a multi-million-dollar financial crime in China, where the individual thought the person on the deep fake was the chief financial officer and allowed a lot of money to come out of that company. So some of the other positive cases when it comes to AI would be the deployment of algorithms in dealing with financial fraud, enhancing compliance and risk assessment and risk management in the financial sector, AI in procurement. One of the other areas in which I specialize would be investigative psychology and of course, looking at anti-money laundering strategies and terrorism financing. And we're seeing an extraordinary amount of positive work in that space. And just one thing that I want us to think about before I turn it over to our very fantastic moderator is that automated suspicion is now being reimagined because of AI and generative AI. And what we are learning in the space of anti-money laundering and terrorism financing is that what used to be perceived as suspicious is presenting new challenges because of deep fakes, because of the fact that fakes are looking so real. So suspicious transactions, or what used to look like suspicious transactions, are now looking so real because of AI and Gen AI. So AI is making us sort of reimagine what automated suspicion looks like. It's making us reimagine what a risk looks like. And I think it's also calling for just a reimagination of the ways in which we are coding danger, risk, and suspicion. So while there are the challenging sociological, approaches that really lean heavily on an approach that needs a more data justice, racial justice, design justice, social justice interpretation, particularly policing in our communities, particularly the ways in which we continue to deploy algorithms in our streets or on our streets, very problematic. But in the suites where we're having crime in the suites, we're seeing that AI and algorithms are doing a pretty solid job. So that is my contribution right there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Renee, Dillon, and Max, for these terrific and extremely interesting contributions that sort of help us understand a little better just how sort of dynamic that field is and how thorny some of these questions are and how quickly we are moving. We've heard, from front end and back end accountability. Max, from you and Dillon, you talked about the social construction of reality and accountability through these technology or data-driven systems, which of course, as a sociologist, I find fascinating. And Renee, thank you so much for your really in-depth descriptions of how these systems are actually being used, what our real problems are, but also what opportunities are. And I much appreciated your note on trauma-informed approaches to these kinds of questions. Now, this is a call for the audience to put questions into the Q&A. We have a little less time today because unfortunately, or lucky for the student, Renee has to go teach at about 6. So I'm going to quickly ask one question to our panelists, and I ask them to be extremely brief in their answer so I can bring in our audience members with their question. My question to all of you is, we're talking about accountability a lot in different kinds of forms, and you all touched upon that. You also all touched upon the importance of lived experience of community members. All of you work with these community members. My question is a quasi-pragmatic one, which is how are we going to forge a notion of AI accountability in law enforcement that puts community members front and center before we have a situation that is so trauma-infused in the way in which you sort of all described and the way in which Renee also described. Maybe we'll go in the order of appearance. So Max, Dillon, and Renee, briefly.
Yeah, I think it's a tough question. And, a lot of times you hear policing agencies say, oh, we're going to do community engagement. And, they've already made the decision, and then they go out and they solicit comments, but nothing really comes of it. I think part of it is that people have busy lives. They don't have, we're sitting here and we all, work on these issues and are intimately familiar with these technologies and how they're used. And a lot of people don't have the first inkling. And so part of it has to be some concerted effort at capacity building. It's hard to know what that looks like because it's so far from where we are now. Another thing I would say is that community engagement, and this is part of the reason why we insist on front-end accountability, community engagement led by policing agencies going out and saying, oh, we're going to try to construct a new policy around drones, and we want to hear your feedback. I just am very doubtful that is ever going to do the trick. I don't think that we can rely on these policing agencies to facilitate that kind of community engagement. Again, I think there are probably folks who are trying. I'm going on too long. I'll just wrap it up and say, I think that the solution to all of this, again, is that community needs to be front and center through this front end accountability.
I think I agree with a lot of what Max said, except to say maybe with like a more cynical tone. I think that it's in the past decade, people do reach for saying like, oh, we need to have, need to give notice that these tools are used. We need basic transparency. Very true. The transparency piece has always been missing. You need like basic transparency, but like people weren't having effective community engagement meetings about the non-tech issues. Why do we think now that we have tech, we're going to have effective community policing about the tech when we didn't have effective community policing before? Like, I think that it's so much and that's like, it sounds cynical. I don't have an answer to that, except to say that like, this is why we have like public officials and like, but I think when we come down to it, in a lot of these places where there are issues of the deployment of tech, the bigger issue is the political question of we don't have public officials who are accountable to their communities. And that's not a tech-specific problem, but it's one in which tech lets us highlight just how egregiously wrong it goes when the people making the decisions seem so uncurious about the tech. And I think a big problem we have is teaching public officials, not like the electeds, not to shut off when tech is in the room and say, actually, this decision to use this new policing tool is a very important policy decision and you shouldn't just defer it to the police. Things like that, but I don't know exactly how you do that.
I think I'm going to be a little more positive, although I do agree with my two former panelists. I think public interest technology is the approach, technology in the interest of the public. I think what we need to do is reimagine community policing. Listen, I'm a criminologist at heart. I've spent a lot of time in communities. I've worked with community members from everything from homicide and gun violence to investigating homicides, investigating kidnappings, working as a profiler to bring children home. But I think if we are to reimagine community policing, I think if we are to combine data activism and data literacy and AI literacy and advocacy, I think if we are to let academia really engage communities and do what we've all been talking about, which is community-inspired AI, then we can help communities. Because look at it this way, we could use a large language model like generative AI in a very positive way, where we can really assess the kinds of approaches to policing that police departments have been doing for communities. I think if communities have the data, and they have the power of that data and the power of advocacy, what you're bringing is a different kind of vision to public oversight. At the moment, I'm actually working with a community to really reimagine what grassroots advocacy looks like, what putting the power of data in the hands of the people looks like. And I think if we really are to adhere to that public interest technology approach, we can do some very creative things to empower communities for them to really understand, and not only understand the relationships or to better the relationships between the communities and the police, but to also analyze those police budgets, those very dark police budgets where they are getting an extraordinary amount of money to build AI-driven tools, to deploy more surveillance technologies, to buy those robot dogs, to deploy more and more shot spotter types of technology. So I think it's up to us as leaders in the space to come up with creative approaches and to really engage those communities. And I think data justice and even the work of our Data Justice Academy at the School of Data Science and professors like John Kropko, and of course, leaders like Claudia Schultz, who are really bringing a social and racial justice approach to the ways in which we're thinking about data. I think we're on to something good. And we have to be positive. We just have to be positive.
Thank you, Renee, for that. And thank you, Dillon and Max, for your takes. I'm going to bring in the audience who have some terrific comments and questions. The first one is from Dr. Stevens, who is asking, is anyone using AI to predict police violence or to predict the likelihood of an individual officer using excessive force? Max, I think this one's for you.
Not that I know of. That's an interesting question. Obviously, Dillon mentioned Trulio, which is not predictive, but can, that's the type of thing that purportedly is supposed to flag when officers escalate, and they're supposed to flag using natural language processing when there is an imminent risk of an officer using force, and flag those videos. But I'm not really aware of a technology that does that sort of prospectively. But my panelists might know some.
Sure, I can jump in here only because I have to leave, but actually it is happening using predictive analytics and AI and virtual reality to bring more accountability and transparency to policing. I would really lift up the work here of Desmond Patton and the work that he has been doing with social workers in the space of violence and really tracking violence across social media. And of course, the work of Courtney Coburn at Columbia University, who has been doing a lot of work at the intersection of policing and virtual reality to bring more accountability, to reduce police violence. And also many individuals who are looking at ways in which we can use AI to really bring more robust and rigorous sort of red flags from an HR perspective to flag those officers who are having too many violent interactions. And with that, I would have to say my goodbye. And thank you so very much for including me in the conversation. Take care.
Thank you so much, Renee. Thank you for joining us. We have a few more questions for Dillon and Max. Dillon, do you want to chime in on this question?
Yeah, I feel bad now that Renee is done.
You go.
Because I would love to have this discussion with Renee also. But something just to highlight though, also, and this is something I tried to get at in my presentation, which is the reality is though that when these of course you could build such a system, right? If you have the data, which is a big if you have that data, you could attempt to predict it. It would have some error. You could use it to flag or alert which officers seem to have the most reports or things like that. I'm more on the skeptical, and not to denigrate the people who work on this, but when you actually look again at the thousands of policing agencies across the country, and sorry for the more international audience, law enforcement agencies across the globe, but especially here in the United States, which have serious accountability deficits, you can't just expect that a system will come into being and will be used. That's a political problem. And the politics of it in a lot of communities and a lot of places are that police departments and law enforcement agencies are extremely powerful. If you live in, I know in New York City, it's very, anywhere you go really in this country, they're really powerful. What political conditions do you need to A, get that data, and B, act on it for accountability purposes? But I also challenge it and say, C, is that really the problem? I would say that I think a lot of policing agencies know which officers use excessive force. People know their colleagues and know who the problem officers are. The problem is those internal affairs files aren't public. The problem is those internal affairs complaints aren't sustained when they could be sustained because of the systems and infrastructure. And maybe tech is an opportunity to intervene in some way, but I think it's important again from that the public interest tech isn't going to only be the answer. This is why it's a political problem.
Just to speak to Dillon's point there, I think it's telling that at least in one and I think maybe two jurisdictions where Trulio had been used and then there was some kind of abuse that had happened, some controversy involving a police officer, the unions pushed Trulio out as soon as it was actually being sort of threatening to them as an actual accountability tool. They ended the contract. So again, anecdotal, but it just speaks to Dillon's point.
Yeah, thank you both for that. And I see sort of interesting parallels with that question also with regards to sort of counter surveillance initiatives that we're seeing as part of, you know, unionization and worker mobilization. So that's that it's an interesting space to observe how tech sort of plays a role here, you know, in tech accountability in the many different facets that it takes. I have another question that is an important one from Ushni Sengupta, who is asking or saying the majority of publicized wrongful facial recognition cases are in the United States, 8 and counting. Are there published examples from other countries using similar technology? Dillon, do you want to go first?
I'm sorry, I don't know if I know myself, except to say that certainly we have examples of it being used in other countries. And you know, it's not like within the EU, I know in India, there's a lot going on around identity and face recognition anywhere. But I think one thing that might be different, and I don't know, one is that there are just, and I don't know how this compares to other countries, but there are so many police officers in the United States. Like, I mean, when you kind of work backwards from how many people are incarcerated in the country, we have a major, you know, sort of policing epidemic. I think that you're going to see discussions of face recognition come up more in other countries in the national security context, where I think knowledge of false positives is, to the extent they exist, like not going to be public information. So I think that it's important. I think that would be my takeaway, is that like it's important to distinguish between the sort of criminal law enforcement context and the national security context, which is huge both in the United States and internationally, especially like EU, China, other places. And like that context is so hard to learn about.
And I'll just add one thing, and I know my co-panelists know this, but for the benefit of the audience, emphasis on the word publicized in this question. There's so many reasons why these legal reasons why the use of these technologies for investigations isn't disclosed, from the fact that sometimes they're procured in a secretive manner to the fact that we have a very flawed prosecution system in which agencies can rely on this type of data, and it never gets disclosed, even when things go badly wrong. So just to the point that there are 8 of these publicized cases or whatever the number is, but my estimation is that it would be much higher.
Yeah, thank you for that. Again, a very important space to sort of observe, and procurement surely is a major area of interest here. And thank you for highlighting these sort of culturally different conversations around AI and crime. I have a few more that are really important. I have one from Joe Roble, which I want to bring in before we turn to the other ones, who is sort of asking, can AI be used to predict where crime will occur, or the best of times or locations to park emergency response vehicles such as ambulances at a certain time or location, which sort of is similar to the question, general question, how do we deploy public resources? Dillon, what do you think?
I'm happy to give a short answer because I think Max maybe will have more to say about it too, but except to say, in terms of place-based predictive policing, that is something that a lot of the vendors do purport to do. And actually, to the extent that it exists and it's based on this idea of, hey, we have data on where past crimes occur, and maybe late at night they happen around the bars, maybe they happen at this gas station, maybe they happen at this convenience store. That's actually, that's what many consider to be like a legitimate use of statistics, to be like, oh, we should learn something about where, violence in our communities happen. I think the problem becomes when those crime reports are, targeted at communities of color or underserved communities or any sort of vulnerable population. And it's not the problem with that data becomes, it's not that it's actually a place where we can predict there may be crime in the future. It's just the data that where crimes have occurred in the past based on how the police have seen those crimes before, but they're not seeing crimes elsewhere because they're not policing those places in the past. But like people do apply like other reasons, like that sort of, oh, I know at late at night a bar is a vulnerable place to be. And like people legitimately learn and can draw lessons from that. But whether it's like predicting crime and actually being really skeptical of where that data is coming from to make that conclusion, those are the important pieces, I think.
Yeah, I agree, and with just that, you know, I've seen conflicting things in the literature. Part of the problem is, you know, it's not just a question of can you predict where crime will occur. There's a baseline question. They're human analysts, so then the question is, if you give the same data to human analysts, would the system perform better or worse? I think Rand had done a study finding that it was effective, but then there were a bunch of other studies going the other way for place-based predictive policing. You know, I think one of the things that kind of stuck out to me in Dillon's response was, you know, there's an interesting thing about those environmental factors, because, you know, one thing you could do is say, oh, well, being near like a liquor store or being near a highway, you know, these are things that are more likely to expose you to crime, so we might make decisions based on that. You know, but at the same time, we need to think about the conditions, you know, the history behind what gave rise to those conditions. And one of the things, this is not predictive policing, but I think it's analogous here. License plate readers, often they end up getting placed in some of these areas near highways. And you talk to police chiefs and they say, well, you know, just kind of makes sense to put them there. And, you know, it doesn't have any kind of disparate impact. The reality is that a lot of these highways run right through Black and brown communities and communities with lots of folks of lower socioeconomic status. And there's a reason for that, because these highways were intentionally placed in ways that were inequitable. And that has had this sort of enduring effect to this day. And all of which is to say, you know, if we are going to sort of take on this project of identifying environmental factors correlated with crime, part of it is we need to figure out how to do that in a way that doesn't just perpetuate those factors that historical and frankly racist factors that led to those conditions. Yeah,
thank you both for that. And it sort of also, you know, comes down to the question, what are we even measuring and to what end, right? Like, how are we inferring these things, and what are the assumptions baked into that, which is a topic you both spoke to. I want to acknowledge a few comments before I ask the last question to you both to close us off. We have Dennis O'Keefe from Chile, Edinburgh, remarking that this is all about democracy, or the question, do we have a democratic deficit? Democracy should be a competition of ideas, I guess, including the question, how are we keeping our communities safe? And then we have another anonymous comment on the international examples, remarking that AI systems are used to police borders of the European Union, which this commentator says is one of the weakest points in the often appraised EU AI Act. They say is a major human rights issue. Last question for you both, and we touched upon this a little bit. Maria Mendez is asking, have you seen concrete examples of community-inspired / public interest AI products? And I suppose in or adjacent to crime, or I would add, you know, civil rights. Max, I'm going to call you out first.
I don't know, maybe it's telling that I'm having a hard time coming up with an example here. I mean, sure, there are accountability tools. I mean, this really goes to Dillon's point about Trulio and Polis, and you know, there's now a market for these types of accountability tools. I guess maybe my response is like, and there may well be many good examples of such technologies, but I think my response would be, well, why would that be? And I think the reason why is because again, these vendors they're trying to make money, they're trying to sell to a specific audience. There's not a lot of money selling to the folks who are like whatever the alternative to police are, and there's a lot of money selling to the police. The police are powerful. They have large budgets. They largely control what they purchase with often minimal legislative oversight. And so I think the lack of these tools might, bespeak some of these larger problems. I will say, there are increasingly sort of general AI tools that are being used in things like 911 call centers, where they could be used for salutary purposes. There's one where, you can transcribe the audio of a 911 call and use natural language processing to cue the call taker to divert a call to an alternative responder. I think that would be an example of a good use case. But again, I think it's telling that those use cases are pretty few and far between.
Yeah, I struggle with that too. Like, it makes me sound like, oh, I'm just like some sort of like Luddite anti-tech person. But like, for reasons Max said, it's, where's the money going to be made? But also back to the politics thing, what are institutions today? Our institutions are the police department. They're going, and to the extent that the police department have a role to play, that's like tools will be geared towards that role. But we've today highlighted a lot of the problems with that in terms of more, what some of us would consider more public interest AI products oriented away from policing. Like, yeah, where are the powerful money spending institutions that are clamoring for it? Where's the political movement that's going to require it? And without those things, there are a lot of and again, not to denigrate the work of a lot of people who have tried to really, who really do work every day to think about how can we make government work better, not just police, not just in policing, but like how can we make government better? We could have a customer service chatbot for unemployment insurance that can triage, when you're applying for unemployment and, help you navigate Byzantine government systems. And that's maybe a good thing, but it's not, I don't know if we're calling that a public interest. Like, that's not going to be like a transformative thing. That's just it's going to end up firing a bunch of caseworkers and de-skilling the population of, AI, of unemployment insurance case managers. But is it going to change how the police work? Is it going to create a universal basic income if that's what you're in favor of? Like, no, because there are other interests at play, not just that drive the creation of tech.
Thank you for those remarks, which I think are perfectly rounding us off in our, a good way to end this important conversation on the intersection of AI and crime. What even is crime? Where is the money? How does the stuff work? What are the risks? What is the work we still need to do? Thank you so much, Dillon and Max, for being here, and also Renee, who had to leave a little early. Thank you very, very much to the Karsh Institute of Democracy and the NYU Institute for Public Knowledge for supporting us. All of these folks, Dillon, Max, and Renee, are online. You can find them and ask them more questions. I'm just going to put that out there. We had a few more questions in the Q&A we could not get to. So please do that. I hope this conversation has helped a little bit with the literacy that different publics require to meaningfully participate in questions around democracy and technology. We're going to break actually for the summer. This is the last Co-opting AI event for the spring. We will be back in the fall with more Co-opting AI conversations on topics such as architecture or the body. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being such a terrific audience. Thank you to our panelists, and have a terrific summer. Take good care. Bye.